Now, it's here for this particular update at Urban is about Sammy Awuku, who happened to be the former NLA boss. Now, we gave you an update, say, Manasa Zire, the investigations, or now a patch say, a brand Sammy Awuku, he was the NLA boss, or the BB buyer, now your friend social good, which was basically replacing the social corporate responsibilities a company say, Michimu ya adia, companies, and as Jumeku. Bibi omo ya omo de boa aman nti dwuma bi omo timi ko che free sanitary pad bi mu ko che insuo ebi mu che aduane communities are said be omo marginalized and omo ni be no they help. So that is what we term as social corporate social responsibility. But then here no Sammy Awuku no change social corporate responsibility no any social good no so obi a wo hia bibi bia bra obeboa, and we saw say he was giving money from the sitting if anything, a first lady to even some MPs they came to take money because they were not feeling well, and this was so sad. Meno can say a special edition about say the Ghanaian people want to see this man behind bars, and up to now, no, a Brahmanasa zero days are exposed whereby this man Sammy Awuku has not been arrested. He's not been invited by the police. He's not been questioned on Namo free, and now no, some people are angry, petitioning why Team Oral is not working. Is it for you share this particular video? Babaka,
fellow Ghanaians. So there are scandals and then there are abominations. And what has been unearthed about the National Go and its so-called Good Causes Foundation, it's not just another case of mismanagement. It's not just another story of waste. It is an abomination against the poorest of the poor, a daylight robbery of the weak, the sick, the orphaned, the aged, and the very people the law says must be protected. And it should make every one of us, every decent Ghanaian, hang their head in shame that we have allowed this to continuously happen, that we have tolerated leaders who think nothing of using the tears of the destitute to polish their political shoes. These are stories that should make every citizen's blood boil. Stories that remind us how far we have strayed from the values of decency, honesty, and the stewardship of public funds. Public funds to cater for the most vulnerable in society, for noble causes, turn into a cash cow for the powerful, the connected, and the already well endowed. And the brazenness of it is only matched by the silence that has greeted it in quarters that should be outraged. Fellow Ghanaians, the law is clear. Section 2.3 of Act 722 is not just some decoration on our laws. It is an instruction that is carved in stone, that there shall be a lottery, and that lottery shall have the object of providing care and protection for the physically challenged, mentally afflicted, the needy, the aged, the orphans, and destitute children. Where in that there is a CEOs, there is a ministers, there is a presidential cousins, there is a magazines. No, it said the afflicted, the needy, the aged, the orphans, the destitute. That is what the law says. That is what the law commands. That is what the law demanded. And yet, what do we find? That Emmy Africa Awards, a show that celebrates the creme de la creme of society, walked away with 90,000 cedis of that amount of money. That the Ghana CEO Awards, a gathering of most of the richest and most connected, was handed a staggering 350,000 cedis. That Gabi Asari or Chiridako's Africa Prosperity Network was showered 250,000 cedis of that money. That the Ghana Club 100 and the GIPC, an event that crowns the most profitable companies, was gifted 400,000 cedis. So you tell me, are these CEOs destitute? Are these business moguls mentally afflicted? Are they orphans the law spoke about? And it goes on like a nightmare. Ashanti business leaders, 350,000 cedis. Glades Women of Year, 80,000. Government PROs awards under the ISD, 40,000. Governance and Business Leadership Awards, 20,000. Ministry of Public Enterprises, 50,000 cedi for a steady tour to Singapore. The National Labour Commission, 180,000 for local conferences and another, and 70,000 for Geneva, 100,000 for a glossy presidential diary. The madness kept going because the office of the Chief of Staff, then one of the most well-resourced offices in this country, took 350,000 cedis to fund Independence Day fanfare. Independence Day fanfare. Independence Day that the state should take care of already. Is that something? And it gets worse. Because Mr. Sammy Awuku, the then Director General of the NLA, now Member of Parliament, is accused of deciding to use funds meant for the afflicted an electoral base, his political stronghold, and where he will later contest to enter parliament, and then further dipped his pot into this to lift 50,000 cedis for Asamoah for his memoir project, a man who lives in a $3 million mansion, one of the wealthiest footballers of his generation. And then we ask, with righteous anger, is Asamoah a destitute? Is he an orphan? Is he a mentally afflicted child waiting for state help? Or is it simply theft, dressed in the language of good causes? Members of parliament from both the NDC and the NPP, they did not miss their slice of this big national cake. More than 1 million cedis for so-called pet causes, while the Attorney General's office then, under Godfrey Dame, already lavishly resourced, took another 570,000 cedis to organize whatever events. We have to ask, if even the Attorney General's office, the supposed guardian of the law, can dip its hands into a fund meant for the afflicted, then what law are we left with? If the presidency, with its hundreds of millions, sometimes billions in budgets, can beg the NLA for 350,000 cedis from funds that are supposed to use for a dedicated purpose, then what morality remains in our politics? Fellow Ghanaians, we have to stop pretending. This is not about sponsorship. This is not about social and corporate responsibility. This is theft by misallocation. This is robbing Peter, who is poor, hungry, and sick, to pay Paul, who is rich, powerful, and connected. This is the state mocking its weakest citizens, mocking the crippled child who never gets a wheelchair, mocking the aged woman who is left to beg by the roadside, mocking the orphan who went to bed hungry, mocking the mentally afflicted who roams our streets. We took the money that is meant for them and we splashed them on CEOs in Cedis, ministers on red carpets, presidential diaries, and glossy magazines. And then we call it what? Good causes. Fellow Ghanaians, we have to call it what it is. These were evil causes. And please, we don't have to confuse the issues. Nobody is saying that the NLA cannot sponsor events as part of its corporate mandate. Nobody is saying the NLA cannot support football or invest in branding. But what cannot and must not be tolerated is using funds that the law specifically ring-fenced for the afflicted. That is the crime, that is the abomination we speak of. We must ask the hard questions now, because silence is complicity. It's Kotoko, the club that I support, an orphan, to receive that amount of money from the good causes funds. It's As a Folk, a destitute. It's Rebecca Foundation, mentally afflicted. It's Independence Day, a crippled old man in need of a wheelchair. It's a glossy presidential diary, the cure for an orphan's hunger. The answers are pretty obvious. So too are the conclusion that this is organized, institutionalized misuse of funds, a betrayal of public trust, and yes, potential crimes. What is worse, fellow Ghanaians? This is not just about the NLA. This is a culture where state institutions raid each other's coffers under pressure, where one public office cannot say no to another, where powerful ministries lean on smaller agencies, and everyone joins in the feast. This is incestuous culture, which must end, because it is killing. It is killing the state from within, and the victims are always the voiceless citizens who never get what was legally set aside for them. Remember, during COVID-19, we had to beg ECOWAS for grains. We had to beg, while millions of cedis meant to buy food for orphans were being wasted on award shows. Today, farmers are throwing away tomatoes because they cannot store them, while NLA funds meant for storage and aid that can be used for some of these purposes are paying for conferences in Geneva. Hospitals lack beds. Children study under trees. The aged languish without pensions. But the money that should ease their suffering is funding glossy events and political pet projects. Do we not feel the shame? Do we not feel the disgust? Do we not fear God? Fellow Ghanaians, if this does not outrage you, then nothing will. If this does not awaken us that public resources that we could use for good causes to change our society, then we are doomed. Because when a society begins to rob its weakest, when government begins to splurge the tears of orphans on the champagne of the powerful, then the moral compass of that society is broken beyond repair. And if the Fourth Estate had not exposed this rot, we perhaps would never even know. We will go on clapping at Independence Day while orphan staff smiling at the award shows that have been bought and paid for, while the destitute suffer. That is why this morning I salute the Fourth Estate. That is what we call model journalism. Because this is what journalism is about. Journalism that bites. Journalism that matters. Journalism that defends the voiceless. And all of us Ghanaian journalists must learn a thing. We must not be parroting politicians and amplifying propaganda. We must dig, we must expose, we must document, we must name and shame. That is a journalism that saves nations. That is a journalism that keeps democracy alive. Hello Ghanaians, this scandal must not be forgotten. It must not be swept under the carpet. It's been 2 weeks, nearly. Nothing has happened. It must not be added to the pile of corruption stories we recite like bedtime tales to our kids. It must be a turning point. We must demand prosecution, demand restitution. We must demand that the Good Causes Fund be insulated, ring-fenced like the framers intended, and never again used for such grotesque abuses. Because if we allow this...